Welcome back to the channel. It has been far too long since I posted my last video. I'm so excited to be back. I am teeming with ideas, and today's video is a great place to start. In today's video, we are going to talk all about where to start or how to start your first crocheted garment. I'll be addressing what tools you need to get started, what skills you need to get started, what to do while you're making, and what to do if you get stuck. This video is also in the form of a blog post, and I also have a flowchart of the easiest to the hardest circle yoke sweaters that I've designed. They're both linked in the caption below. So, first things first, you're feeling confident enough to tackle your first crocheted garment, and that's huge, so congratulations. The confidence you're feeling right now and being ready to tackle that first garment is the biggest hurdle. I promise you can do it. I'm going to throw a lot at you in this YouTube video. You do not need to be a master of all of it. They're just things for you to be aware of and be ready to tackle when you're making your first garment. You can also come back to this video or head to the blog post if you're stuck at any point in making your first garment. Use this as your resource. So let's talk about how to set yourself up for success when crocheting your first garment. The goal is obviously to have a finished object that you love and it fits your body well. You want to make sure that you choose a garment that fits your skill level. I know, sometimes you'll see that fingering weight lace dress and you're like, I'm gonna make that as my first garment. Might not be the best way to set yourself up for success. You want to try something in a heavier weight of yarn with nice simple stitches just to get your feet wet in garment making. Because if you tackle a design that's way too difficult for you, you're just going to become overwhelmed and feel discouraged, and that might prevent you from progressing to those harder designs in the future. So how do you know if something fits the difficulty level that you're capable of? There's a couple of different ways. On Ravelry, you'll find user-generated difficulty level on patterns. So if you scroll down a little bit, you'll see how difficult other people who have made that pattern found it to be. Also, some designers, like myself, include it in the caption of their designs, or something I recently did was I made my designs on my website shoppable by difficulty level. There's a little drop-down menu at the top where you can click shop by weight or skill level, and then it's got beginner, beginner plus, intermediate, and advanced patterns available in categories for you there. And as I mentioned at the start of this video, I actually created a flow chart for all of my circle yoke sweaters because those are my most common thing that I design, from easiest to most difficult, and they're in tiers. When I sat down to make this chart, I had no idea how many circle yoke sweaters I have designed, but it's a lot. There's a lot to choose from there, so go check it out. The flow chart begins with the Clara sweater, which is a very simple in the round, continuous round sweater. Then it works its way up to sweaters that have some kind of accent stitch in that second tier. In the third tier, you start to see things like short rows. Things get a little bit more tricky with the stitches. And then in that final tier, you're seeing more short rows, you're seeing color work, you're seeing more pockets and zippers and buttons and things like that. So if you click the link below, it'll open the PDF of that flowchart for you, and then you're able to click each individual pattern name and it'll bring you to the listing for that pattern so you can see if that's something that you would like to make. So after you've chosen the pattern that you want to make and think you're capable of making based on the difficulty level, the next thing you're going to need is a good toolkit. I know the temptation can be to just get the hook size that's recommended in the pattern, get the yarn that's recommended in the pattern, and start stitching, but that does not guarantee that your stitches are going to be the same size as the stitches that the designer made. We all tension our yarn differently. We all hold our hook differently. There's so many factors that go into getting those stitches the right size, and that's why you should have a variety of hook sizes. I would say if the pattern calls for a 5mm hook, I would probably have hooks down to like 4mm, maybe even 3.75, and up to maybe 7mm on the other end to make sure that you'll be able to achieve the gauge in this pattern. And yes, I will be talking about gauge a little bit later in this video. The next important factor is to choose the right yarn. You want to choose something that is the same weight as it is in the pattern. You want to choose something that fits your budget. You want to choose something that you don't mind the feel of up against your skin. And there's so many factors that go into choosing the right yarn. I also have a full blog post about that, and we'll be making a video about it in the future. That's also linked in the caption. Now let's talk about the skills you should have before hopping in to create your first crocheted garment. First, and this seems kind of obvious, is the stitches. You should have mastered the stitches that the pattern calls for. If you're still following along with a YouTube video on how to make a half double crochet and you want to create this whole sweater using half double crochets, you might need a little bit more practice with those half double crochets so that you don't really have to think about how to construct each stitch while you're also trying to construct a whole garment. And with regards to the stitches, you should also know how to increase and probably how to decrease in that stitch as well. Garments are not dishcloths. They are dynamic, they increase, they decrease. For example, this sweater starts here, increases out, the body is straight, but the sleeves decrease down to the wrist. So this sweater, even though it's my most beginner-friendly circle yoke sweater, you still need to know how to increase and how to decrease in order to get the fit just right. The second thing I recommend that you know before you begin is pattern shorthand. Pattern shorthand is where you see SC, DC, HDC, BLO, things like that. If you don't know these shorthands, you're not going to be able to read the pattern. Now this you don't have to have mastered before you hop into your first garment, but maybe have the legend of the pattern pulled up or a website pulled up with those crochet shorthands on them, so that way you're not confused while you're reading. With regards to crochet shorthand, there are two different types as well too. There's US and UK. All of my patterns are written in US shorthand, but be careful when you're shopping online. Some can be UK, some can be US, and that changes what stitch you're making based on what short form is in the pattern. I've also linked the Craft Yarn Council page on how to read a crochet pattern and crochet shorthand in the caption. Now it's my favorite part of the video, gauge. So if you're new here, welcome. I talk about gauge a lot. Like in everything I do, a lot. So why do I talk about gauge so much? Because having the correct gauge per the pattern is the only way to guarantee that your finished piece is the size that the designer intended it to be. So this will guarantee that it's going to fit your body the way that it's intended to fit. Another important note is that incorrect gauge disproportionately affects plus size makers. If you're off by a stitch and you're an extra small, it might only add an inch or two or remove an inch or two from your finished piece. But if you're doing a 5X, it's going to affect the ease, how much room there is in your sweater, by a lot more. So make sure that your gauge is correct. If you don't even know what gauge is or where to start with gauge, I've got a 5-part blog series on gauge. That's how important it is. That's also linked down below. Gauge and stitch consistency are like this. Stitch consistency is what will get you the right number of stitches in rows in that 4-inch or 10-centimeter square. If you're hitting gauge, but you have one big half double crochet and one small and one that's kind of wonky looking, that's going to show on your finished piece. So before beginning, you want to make sure that you're getting your stitches nice and consistent and equal. That way your sweater doesn't end up having wonky rows or looking bumpy when you don't want it to look bumpy. Now, again, that's not to say every stitch needs to be absolutely perfect. Mine are still not, and I'm an expert crocheter. Just try to get them looking as equal as possible, and at the end of the day, if you're happy with how they look, that's all that matters. The next thing before you begin is understanding ease and choosing your size. So, for most garments, we use our bust measurement. That's the spot around the widest part of our bust to determine which size we'll be making. Many patterns include what is called intended ease. Positive ease is when the garment measures larger than your bust measurement. So if your bust measurement is 40 inches and the finished garment measures 44 inches, that is 4 inches of positive ease. With that 40-inch bust, if your finished garment measures 38 inches, that's 2 inches of negative ease. For example, my patterns will say the sample has 3 to 6 inches of positive ease. Choose your size based on your bust measurement to have a similar fit to the sample. Many designers use the Craft Yarn Council Women's Standard Measurements chart, and I've got that linked below as well too, so you can see which size you are. However, it should also be listed in the pattern. The Craft Yarn Council also has a really handy resource for how to measure your body and where to measure your body to get certain measurements. And again, I've linked that below. Now, just because the pattern says that there's 4 inches of intended positive ease does not mean that you need to do that size. You can size up or down to get a less fitted or more fitted piece, depending on your wants and needs. So with all that said, you're now ready to start making your first garment. Let's talk about what happens if you get stuck while you're making. First, do not panic. Do not get into overwhelm. It's okay. You've got a toolbox, you've got skills, you can sort this out. The first place to check if you're stuck on something in the pattern is the pattern itself. Often, designers create resources at the start or end of the pattern. Sometimes they have external resources linked in the pattern itself. Sometimes there's photos in the pattern that you can lean on. Make sure you're reading all the notes, whether they're at the start of the pattern or the end, or if they're right near where you're stuck. The next place that I recommend that you check is for any FAQ section on the designer's website. Before setting up the FAQ section on my website, I would say about 50% of the pattern support questions that I would get would be those FAQs. So see if the designer has it. Check out mine on the contact page of my website. My next recommendation is to just take a break. Walk away, clear your mind, go for a walk outside, give yourself a break. Sometimes we tend to overthink and we're looking at this thing for too long. You just need to take a break, step back, and come back to it with fresh eyes. In that regard too, if you're finding yourself stressed and overwhelmed, matching where the designer pulled that loop of yarn up in the exact same spot, don't worry. You don't need to pull that loop up in the exact same spot as the designer. Don't obsess about it. At the end of the day, if you're happy with how it looks and your stitch counts are at least pretty close to what the designer has, roll with it. The next place I recommend looking when you're stuck on a pattern is for external resources. Again, this one seems common sense, but when we're in those moments where we're stuck and we're frustrated, we tend to not think super clearly. This is the point of the video where I tell you to Google your question. Sorry. But seriously, there are an abundance of resources out there. Blogs, YouTube videos, books, videos on Instagram, on TikTok. There are so many resources out there about how to knit and crochet. Why not see if one of those answers your question? Another great spot to check is in Ravelry forums or on the design itself on Ravelry. People who have made it can link their projects. In those projects, they can put in comments. So if they got stuck in a certain spot, they might address that in their project that they added to Ravelry. Lastly, if you can't find the answer in the pattern, you can't find it on the FAQ page, you can't find it on Google or YouTube or Instagram or TikTok or Reddit, it's time to ask the designer. When you reach out to a designer, try to see if they have a preferred way to be contacted. Personally, I do not answer pattern support questions in Instagram DMs or comments or anything like that. They need to come via email. Why am I such a stickler about pattern questions coming via email? Because when they come in via email, it means I'm answering them when I'm seated at my desk and have access to all of my patterns. If you send me an Instagram DM, I'm on my phone when I'm walking my dog, in the line at the grocery store, I'm distracted, I don't have access to my patterns. Also, Instagram hides a lot of your DMs from me. So Don't DM me pattern questions. Email me. That being said, this is not universal for all designers. If you're wondering how to get in touch with the designer, check the pattern to see if the pattern says how to get in touch. Check their bios on their social media. Make sure that you're reaching out to them in a way that you know you're going to get a good response from them. That being said, I know we live in a time of instant gratification. However, the vast majority of designers are a one-person show, so we don't answer our emails 24/7, 365. Be patient. Everyone has different things going on in their lives. They need to sleep. They have kids. They have a dog. They have family. They have vacations planned. Sometimes it's going to take a few days to get that response to you, but I think it's a big part of a designer's job to answer all pattern support questions. When you reach out to the designer, make sure that you include as much information as possible about where you're stuck. This means that you list which design you're working on, which size you're working on, which area of the pattern you're on, or which row or round. Being as specific as possible will get you that answer a lot faster from the designer because you don't have to go back and forth a number of times. Now, what to do when you've finished your first piece? You've fastened off, maybe you've weaved in your ends. I don't. The only thing I recommend is wet blocking your finished garment. Wet blocking is going to just make the drape so much nicer. It often softens the fabric as well too, so it feels better on your skin. It just elevates the garment to the next level. How to block is not something I have a resource on just yet, although it's in the works. So if you're not sure how to wet block, you can find that somewhere else on the internet for now. And that brings us to the end of the video. If you are interested in making one of my garments, your first crocheted garment, I do recommend starting with the Clara sweater, and check out the flowchart PDF linked below. That will help you to determine which sweater you can make next. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Happy crocheting!